Hi there. Here's another video. An interesting thing. I had my videos on cymbals, right? I had my cymbal stash I have a lot of my Paiste videos, and there's somewhere I compare Zildjians with Paistes, but specifically B20 with B8. Now, I've always felt that generally speaking, B20 sounds better, more pleasing to the ear in a lower, I mean, this is not brain surgery. I mean, a lot of people, jazzers will be sitting there looking at me like, we know. But sounds more pleasing to the ear in closer confines at lower volumes. B8 alloy was developed, or its intent was to be used in a higher volume environment where where the frequencies would carry through. Okay? So almost like a context instrument, right? Like you'd hear it in the context. Now, certain people have a preponderance just to prefer the sound of B20 and the sound of B8. I think sometimes it's changeable. You can turn some B8 people onto B20 and vice versa. Although I've always felt B20 always, again, in the immediate environment, like when you're playing or in a room, it kind of sounds better. And especially like for jazz and things, or at least the way we're attuned, used to hearing jazz, which the older stuff was always recorded with B20 alloy, because that's just what they always used, companies. But check this out. What I have here are two cymbals, okay? Two of my favorite cymbals. Now, this is a Giant Beat reissue, which I've used in other videos before. 20-inch Giant Beat multi, okay? This baby weighs in, if I'm not mistaken, at about 1940-ish. And then this Zildjian is about the same, maybe a teeny bit heavier. Okay? Remember these now this is a symphonic. Where the hell is the logo? Well, it's not on here. It's a symphonic French. Okay? Now, my beef with Zildjian for a long time, well, not my beef, but one thing is, into the late 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, and beyond, until recently, Zildjian, like all cymbal companies did over the years, with probably the exception of Paiste 602, I don't think they ever, even in the 60s, 70s, 80s, asked around with the weight of their cymbals. But, the 2002s, and as years went by, they thickened them up. Zildjian too. But Zildjian also changed the shape. Anyway, here, let me show you the logo, okay? Symphonic French. So you'll see these sometimes. Symphonic, okay? French is the thinnest. Zildjian has a thing where it's French is the thinnest, Viennese is the middle, and Germanic or Wagnerian, Germanic are the heaviest, okay? So I steer clear of the Germanic because they're the heaviest. I mean, they're really sewer cappy. The French I love. Sometimes in a pair of Viennese, I like one of them, because in those symphonic pairs, one is always heavier than the other. It's just the way they do it. One's heavier, one's slightly lighter. But in the French, both are, even though one's heavier, I prefer both of them, whether they're 18s or 20s. I'd love to get my hands on a pair of 22 French. I remember Steve Weiss. Was it Steve Weiss? He was blowing them out some years ago, and I didn't buy any. Gosh darn it. But so here we go. Now check these out. And I'll go on a little more about the specifics, but listen to this. The pitch of the cymbals is pretty much identical. Now there's a very slight, flatter, slightly lower fundamental in the bell there, but it's very close. So this is, I think, can be sort of like apples to apples in a certain way as far as B8 versus B20. So in Crashville, you can hear that B8 ring in there. So I find these, I've just realized that they're great for comparison because of the similarity in. Da, 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 da. Da, da. Da, da, and there's a little, there's a slight counter note, and there's sort of like an off-kilter sort of note in there. Sort of a, what would the term be? Anyway, it doesn't matter though, because this is probably the best sounding B8LA 20-inch crash I've ever heard. I mean, the sound of this crash cymbal is 1970, 1971 Led Zeppelin all over the place. Listen to listen to everything on Zeppelin 4. That whole giant beat era. Which, by the way, if you listen, here's the thing. When I listen to a good pair of original 15-inch giant beat hats, when you listen to like a lot of what's on Zeppelin 4, or the songs from Zeppelin 4 they use later, like on House of the Holy they use No Quarter, and then on Physical Graffiti there were one or two songs on there which were from 1970, 71. Night Flight, and there's another one I can't think of it. But listen, you can hear very much, there's a very signature sound of Bonham's drums in there. You hear it on Rock and Roll, you hear it on Night Flight, you hear it on Down by the Seaside, you hear it on what is it? Stairway to Heaven, Rock and Roll, Down by the Seaside, Night Flight. You can really hear it on the companion disc. When you listen to the Coda companion disc, listen to If It Keeps On Raining, the levee's going to break, which is a When the Levee Break, a version of When the Levee Break. Okay? That is the coolest sounding effing, you know what? Again, so much for me. It's 50% the songs. Really. I mean, I love Zeppelin tunes, but it's the frickin' sound. I don't know how to explain it. It's the sound. It's just the sound. Just the sound. So, anyway, listen to this. Tell me this isn't the total da-na-na-na-na, here we are in the studio, da-na-na-na-na. The track slowed down a little bit. I mean, God bless America, okay? And I've always felt that, and when the reissue Giant Beats first came out in 2005, not only was I ecstatic, it was terrific, because there had been rumblings before that when I used to call up Paiste. Now remember, I used to call up Paiste, I swear, seriously. They'd be like, hey, it's this dude from Chicago again. You know what I'm saying? But it's just true. I'd call up, and any company. If I have an idea, I actually went to Wrigley Gum in 1991 or 2. And I said, hey, dudes, you guys should make caffeine gum. Put a little bit of caffeine in gum. Like, I said, everybody knows that Mountain Dew has a shitload of caffeine. That's kind of why they drink it, right? Just you don't have to put too much in the gum. Just a piece or two has maybe 2 pieces of the gum, chiclet style, would have as much caffeine as a can of Coke, right? So I've done wacky stuff like that. I actually have a lot of ideas. I'm similar to the idea, like, remember, was it Bob and Chuck from Night Shift? I feel like Michael Keaton's character. Anyway, but I used to call up Paiste. I mean, honest to God, when I first called Paiste in 1994, I think it was, because at the time I was trying to get my hands on some 505s because they discontinued them, and they said they didn't have any in the vault, those rat bassages, and of course some came out. They must have been the Swiss vault. Here, there, they were just lying to me. Surprise. I mean, why wouldn't, I guess I'm a joker from the Midwest. Anyway, I told him when I called up, I said, hey, Giant Beats, blah, 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 Giant Beat. And the lady was like, Giant Beat? You mean like a big red beat? That's what this lady at Paiste said to me. A big red, like she thought was funny. I was like, no, a Giant Beat cymbal. But the reissues are, I gotta tell you, I remember there were rumblings that over the years, like in 2000, 2001-ish, and 2-ish, I remember when I'd call up out there, and often it was Andrew Shreve later on I spoke to, who was a super nice guy. He very much tolerated my calls, very kindly. Really, he really did. But he's like, yeah, it's funny, Terry, other people, some endorsers have been asking about Giant Beats. We made some prototypes. And somebody sent me some, maybe he did. Did he send me, somebody sent me pictures of Giant Beat prototypes. I was like, wow, god darn, they sure look the same. Now, they're not the same. They're like 80% the same, but in like mostly the good way, okay? The shape of the cymbal is essentially, in my opinion, this is the shape of a 2002. Okay, but then they hammer and lathe and treat like a giant beat. Okay, the original giant beats really had from my experience, had like when you see one of the 505s, when you see the shape of the 505s, that to me is really the shape of original giant beats. Okay, you can kind of see, I've said before, like the inflection point. See how it kind of curves up, and then right about there, there's an inflection point where it kind of goes. There's a little bit of that, almost like okay. You'll see that in some 2002s, especially the bigger ones. But the reissue giant beats, when I first heard these babies, the neat thing about them was that I thought it ultimately what it was. Ironically, they were like, well, here's the rock and roll, the sound of the B8 that really brought B8 to the fore in rock and roll. But those reissues, really, I felt showcased the whole spectrum of how B8 could be used, not just necessarily just as a volume enhancer and kind of sound good over instruments, how original ones sort of sounded, but as a truly character-laden cymbal. Okay, I really think the giant beats. I felt at the time, I'd posted on one or two of the chat rooms, the drum forums, that I really thought a lot of jazz guys should check them out. And I know a lot of jazz guys. There's so many jazz folks that are so married to B20. Because it's been. I mean, B20 sounds great in the context of jazz. It really does. I mean, it always has. There's nothing to really compare it to because they've always used B20. Whether old Ks or regular Zildjians, or if somebody was playing old, Italian rotocast stuff for 602s. But really, these reissue giant beats, I felt like, a lot of jazz, and there were a lot of jazz folks that replied. They're like, "Hey, Terry," or whatever, or Bonzolium, or whoever the hell you are. Yeah, they do sound good for that use. So, and the neat thing is I did recommend to them when they first came out, again, I would type it in a letter or an email that would probably go off and they'd pitch it right in the garbage, or maybe I mentioned it to Andrew, I'm sure I mentioned it to Andrew Shreve, but they should have had a slightly heavier version on the multis. Because these are great. It's not that they're super thin. I was really surprised when they came out with the thin model. And every thin that I've seen, every giant beat thin I've ever seen has dents all around the edge. And it's a malleable, it's a soft, cymbal. But I thought, all right, so let's say this baby's like 1,900 grams, right? This giant beat multi. I felt like they should make a 20 that's maybe at most 200 grams heavier. And you want to steer away from the heavy moniker, right? So call this the multi, call the existing one thins. I guess there's a market for those, which is terrific. And maybe just call these, not these, but slightly heavier ones mediums. Because I've said in my other videos, the original giant beats had pretty wide weight discrepancies. Like I remember having in my possession, well, I should say they were my friend Bob's at the time, like a 1,380 gram giant beat, white label giant beat. I think the ink on that one was gone. That white label came off pretty fast. It came off pretty easy. And then also there's like a 1,530 gram. So sometimes like a good 150 gram weight. I mean, the original giant beats, from my experience, cymbal to cymbal, the weights were sort of different. It's like a modern, like Zildjians would be. Zildjians or Sabians, not the Paiste consistency. Where they, like, remember, Zildjians are made, and Sabians, when they make their B20 cymbals, they have like a big bowl of molten bronze, right? And they take a little bit out like a chip, like an individual cookie, and then they roll that, and they treat this thing, and they do that, and then there's the cymbal. Whereas what Paiste does, the Paiste method, is take that big whole thing of molten cast metal, it's all cast, and they take that and roll it all flat, and then make, so it's like if you make cookie shapes this way, instead of just taking each individual cookie and going like that. It's really a half a dozen the one and 6 of the other. You know what I'm saying? But obviously it provides a consistency, especially in weight and stuff, because if they have the thinness going straight across the board, you're going to get a much tighter range of control than if you're making sort of one at a time, and then the cymbal tester, when he hears it, decides whether it's a medium or a medium thin or whatever in Zildjianville, so it weighs different. Doesn't make any damn sense. But, so I think, and my advice to Paiste was and always should be that if they maybe came out with a slightly heavier giant beat version, maybe just call it a medium, that would be terrific. Not so much in the 24, but in the 18 and the 20. Okay, I've also said that the Paiste should go back to making a 23-inch version. I've been yipping at that. about that forever, but of course Zildjian came out with the 23-inch Sweet Ride 2 years ago. I don't know how it's selling, so maybe it didn't sell it. But I always thought it'd be cool because the rage of bigger cymbals and 15-inch ads. Anyway, yeah, so slightly heavier giant beats. But listen to these guys. Back to the cymbals. I'm off that tangent. I mean, listen to the similarity in the tone. Okay, listen to da da ta. They're very similar, so we can really kind of hopefully isolate them, hold in a vacuum, and get sort of the tone of these two cymbals. Okay, a B20 Zildjian and a B8 Paiste. Now, generally speaking, you'd say with B8 in general, it's a livelier sounding cymbal because there's more copper in it, okay? Amongst other things, you know, proprietary stuff Paiste might do to it or whatever. You know, and a big thing is, too, Zildjian and Sabian, I've said this before, they make B8 cymbals, but they just crank them out real fast. They make them the same sheet way. They don't do a whole lot to them because B8 sometimes can sound decent even if you don't do a whole lot to it, especially hi-hats, just the nature of the beast. You know, and Zildjian and Sabian used to shite all over Paiste for saying, well, you know, our cymbals are cast and your aren't, which is just BS. Like I said, Zildjian and Sabian, remember Sabian pretty much is Zildjian. One of the Zildjian brothers opened in the Zildjian factory, blah, blah, blah. You know, individual chunks, roll it, make a cymbal. Individual chunks, roll it, make a cymbal. What Paiste does is take all that molten stuff in the first place, roll it up, okay? But Sabian and Zildjian really relegated B8 alloy, again, to their lower line cymbals. You know, they can sell a lot of them. And they also can marketingly say, well, yeah, we use B8, but we use it as our intro stuff because it's just crap. Okay. Well, the neat thing, what I thought was terrific about the reissue giant beats, was it really showcased the overall sound potential of B8 alloy. And I also told that to my feelings of that to Eric Paiste. Eric Paiste, wonderful guy, got a hold of me about my PST7 video I made. When those PST7s came out, I thought, wow, man, that's a great bang for the buck for people. They're a lot like 2002s, but just the sustain doesn't go on as long. Great cymbals, incredible entry level, incredible cymbals, I think. But he contacted me about that video I made, and I was thrilled about it because I think of all the years I've called a Paiste, I've called a Brea out there. I even called Price Switzerland once twice, and somebody was like, "Hello, it's Nick Ligging," or whatever, and I was like, "Hi, this is Terry King from Chicago." Click. But he called. I gave my number then, and he called, and he was happy about the video, and I think he was just really happy about it. He was like, wow, you know, I really like the video and stuff. It was kind of neat. I kind of felt like, you know, it was kind of nice. I was kind of like, hey, well, thanks, Eric. You know, we had sort of a bromance. We talked a lot. We texted a lot for about 6.3 days. I gave him all my ideas that I'd given to Paiste underlings over the years. I actually made a bunch of videos for him of some other stuff and my ideas, which only he could see. Which are only for him. But we had a falling out. I had some ideas about a couple things. I was, you know what it was? In this day and age, I don't know if you've noticed how competitive the musical instrument department has got. I mean, drums now, you can get full birch and full maple kits now for like $300-400. 10, 12 years ago, you had to spend over $1,000 to get one, unless the Pacific PDP CX series changed all that. Suddenly they were offering a $500 or $600 all maple set. Everything went, and suddenly now you can get all these terrific all maple and all birch sets for nothing. Well, in Cymbalburg, you have that going on a little too. You have the Chinese making cymbals. They're coming in from China, you know, and you know it's only a matter of time before they get really good sounding. So my advice to all cymbal makers were, well, let's just say I gave Eric Paiste some advice. I thought maybe to try to stem off, you know, maybe in the short run to try to fight off, you know, get a better position for when suddenly you know, Stag or some of these cymbal companies are coming, and they already are. A lot of these cymbals do sound great. There's a lot of younger people now that really see Sabian, Paiste, and Zildjian amongst equally like Stag and Bosphorus and all this stuff, like on even plane. Whereas older guys like us would see Sabian, Zildjian, and Paiste, and then underneath like Bosphorus, Stag, Crescent, that kind of thing. Okay, but now people coming right out, they don't automatically gravitate to Paiste or Zildjian, right? I mean, they really go out and they listen. A lot of them vote with their pockets, with their dollars. So my only point to Eric Paiste was, Eric, God love you, had to do with, well, if you could, it's a long story. I was just trying to be helpful. Anyway, wonderful guy, gave him all my ideas. Hopefully he listened. Again, hopefully, my point is just that, you know what it was? My point was that Paiste really has totally, they're sharp as hell. You know, they have the B15 or B12, you know, the signature proprietary. They also have totally figured out B8. Again, Sabian and Zildjian just arse around with it. And every so often, Zildjian, Sabian will try to do something with B12 or B8. You don't know if they're kind of doing it on purpose, or if they really, I don't think they really, they know they don't know what they're doing with those alloys. They do. You can really make B8 and B15 sound good. I mean, really good. Zildjian had that prototype, Project 391 or something, and they were B15, they looked almost exactly, they were like a total knockoff of signatures. Remember like the old signatures with the Frankenstein sound formulas? Well, right around that time, I had asked, my idea to Eric Paiste was, well, do you find in other countries where the Chinese don't have really a leg in selling their cymbals, that in some of those countries your fancier, shinier cymbals sell better? Fair question. And of course, you know, Eric, I know it's the, you know, the policy of the company is like, well, you know, we don't, and sure, you know, we don't make the cymbals for how they look. If they happen to look cool or exotic, that's just because we like the sound, which is fine. And I said that. I said, terrific. But I was like, nonetheless, do you find the cymbals that end up looking exotic and really cool and shiny and disco looking, do they sell better in countries like Mexico or you know, warmer climate, up and coming, where people are getting more money to start buying cymbals, maybe where the Chinese, these cymbal companies in China don't have a leg in there yet, where Paiste and Zildjian have more of a distribution network already established, where Paiste could maybe kind of really get going in other countries there. Does that make any sense? Not being chased out of the United States, but at least, you know, still deal with here in the United States, but get a leg, you know, get the ball rolling in other countries at least before the Chinese can work their way in there too. And Paiste also, I told him, has a huge advantage too, like I said before, is they really know B12 and B8. Again, I've always said Paiste should adopt the slogan, Paiste knows B8. That should be their slogan, Paiste knows B8. Because Zildjian and Sabian sure don't. Meinl does. Still not, I think, up to par there. But all those Chinese companies, all those cymbals they're bringing in, they're all B20. Okay? Paiste has an advantage there. They're making B8 and B15 cymbals that sound great. You know, if very soon or now, Chinese companies are making these B20 cymbals that sound terrific, well, Sabian, in my opinion, Sabian and Zildjian should be crapping the biggest bricks because all their cymbals, all their like high-quality cymbals are made out of that alloy. Paistes are not. So Eric, if you or anybody who's watching this, that was my point. Just trying to help. No hard feelings. So, anyway, and again, I also said a sound edge pair of giant beat hi-hats. If they made a sound edge pair of giant beat hi-hats, original sound edge hi-hats, originally just sound edge hats, were B20 602s. A beautiful, delicate, a very thin pair, but a beautiful sounding pair of hats. If you made a giant beat version, it would be like its sister counterpart. They'd be apples to apples, just like this. Except in that example with Paiste, it would be a 602 B20 pair, and then a B8 giant beat sound edge pair. I told Eric Paiste they would sound terrific. I'm sure they would. So I also told them, too, if it was a big enough hassle, they didn't even have to necessarily whip up a giant beat sound edge bottom. They could use a 2002 bottom, sound edge bottom, just like how Zildjian used to do the KZ, right? They'd take a K top and his pre-existing Z bottom. We'll just take a giant beat, nice, thin 15-inch top and pair it with the 2002 sound edge bottom. Either way, I think a sound edge pair of giant beats is brilliant. I think he thought it was a great idea, too. Anyway, I don't know how that fell in a handbag. I wish those guys luck, all the companies. Again, Paiste, like I told you, I think you guys have a leg up because you know how to make cymbals out of other alloys and they sound terrific. So there you go. Thanks for watching. More videos on the way. Actually, a lot of videos on the way because now, you know, school started and I have some more freedom. Thanks for watching my videos. Deal with this heat wave that's coming up, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for subscribing. My subscriber rate's really suddenly gone way up. I'm getting a lot of subscribers a week now. And don't forget, if you can, buy my disc on eBay. I'm selling. When you see these on eBay, I'm the guy selling. It's me. I'll sign it for you. I'll mail it out to you. And I remember these are all my tunes. One of them was on the radio. Number 3, In My Heart. You can look it up, WXRT. In Chicagoland. Thank you. More videos on the way.